he acquires 2 parcels totaling 800 acres on Buffalo Creek, about 30 miles south of Natchez. These lands were Spanish land grants. Remaining in the St. Catherine Creek area are Zachariah's daughters Elizabeth, married to James Foster, and Sarah, married to James's brother Thomas. When Zachariah first moves to Wilkinson County, he lives near his daughter Mary and her husband William Kelsley. Widowed in 1791, Mary subsequently marries John Foster, brother of James and Thomas. And Mary and John Foster moved to Wilkinson County themselves in 1807 and lived near Zachariah and Frances. Zachariah acquires additional land in 1790 near St. Catherine's Creek, and these acres are bound by Richard Harrison and James Foster. Was Zachariah moving back and forth between Buffalo Creek and Wilkinson County and Adams County's St. Catherine's Creek, or did he use one residence as a residence and the other one for tobacco production, or maybe some of his older children lived in one place and some of the other children lived in the other place? We really do not know. The final land acquisitions for Zachariah occur in 1793 and 1797 when he adds 1,573 acres to his Buffalo Creek holdings. In 1890, Reuben Davis wrote in his book, Reflections of Mississippi and Mississippians, that the life of every man of action is full of incident, more or less interesting to those who come after him. We can imagine that Zachariah is comfortably settled near Buffalo Creek, admiring his ever-expanding family, continuing to grow crops, and maintaining his health as the years advance. Unfortunately, he finds himself in a very difficult situation in 1794. It is definitely a story of interest to his descendants, for it affords us a rare glimpse into the character of this remarkable man. The incident is described in the Natchez Court's records as the King versus Zachariah Smith. The document which Zachariah Smith presents to the court in February 1794 reads in part, Petition of Zachariah Smith, an unfortunate old man, conscious of his own feeling and principle that influenced his conduct before he came to this country, and in all time since that he has deserved a better fate, who has no charge to bring against any, but to exculpate himself by relying upon the evidences of the most respected inhabitants of this country, some of whom were acquainted with your petitioner before he came to this country. Zachariah then names 14 men, including Colonel Hutchins, who also signed the regulator's petition. These men will testify on his behalf. He proclaims, these gentlemen, as far as they know, will justify your petitioner as an honest man, a fair dealer, and a quiet and peaceful neighbor. That language echoes words used a few years earlier to describe David Smith during his travails with the same court. Ironically, Zachariah, you will remember, was one of the respected gentlemen who attested to the good character of the accused in the previous case. The ill-fated events which brought Zachariah to court may have originated in 1792, when Charles Percy, a Buffalo Creek neighbor, sold Zachariah a chest of tools. Later, Percy retrieved the tools because Zachariah was unable to pay for them. Furthermore, the men often squabbled over property boundaries. Such disagreements caused many feuds in this wild country as surveyors worked under difficult conditions and boundary-making rivers and creeks inconveniently changed course regularly. The court petition focuses on several incidents in late 1793 involving Mr. Percy and 2 of Zachariah's sons, James and Zachariah Jr. James operated a ferry boat across the Homachetta River. He loaned one of his boats to Charles Percy, and when he went to get his boat, soon discovered that the boat was ruined because of a hole burned through its bottom. James, who may have been a bit overzealous and certainly not careful in his conversation with Charles Percy, immediately rejected Percy's offer to pay for the boat. The younger Smith's response was that it was the boat that he wanted, and that Percy might keep his money to pay his ferriage across the river Styx. For this rude language, a local magistrate, and Percy was a magistrate, might have given Smith a night's lodging in the blockhouse. Zachariah Jr., accompanying his brother on this errand, is reported to have echoed the disrespectful remarks and further offended Percy. Zachariah Sr., aware that additional calamities might descend upon the family if the problem weren't resolved quickly, went to see Charles Percy and beseeched him to reconsider any action at all. And in his role as magistrate, Percy agreed, saying that Zachariah and his sons would just have to sign a statement of apology. In the second meeting, Percy, still seeming very amiable, read a declaration to the Smiths. Given that the men were barely literate, they did not question Percy's unusual approach. Tremendously relieved, the Smiths signed the document. What they didn't know was that Charles Percy had read from a second, much milder document. He had, in fact, coerced the unsuspecting Smiths into signing a damaging statement wherein they admitted to sabotaging the boat themselves and to other crimes fabricated by Percy. It's important to consider that at the time of the disagreements with the Smiths, Charles Percy was suffering from depression and psychosis, which likely contributed to his bizarre behavior. Percy believed that he had enemies everywhere. Moreover, in his fragile mental state, Percy was certain that James had burned the hole in the boat himself, and irrationally, that James had planned to kill him. This description of Charles Percy's deteriorating mental condition is derived from Bertram Wyatt Brown's book, The House of Percy. The Smiths signed the proffered document and soon left Percy's home on that fateful day. Percy then directed his overseer, David Lejeune, present during the reading of the statement, to sign as a witness. And though Lejeune wanted to read the content of the paper before he signed, Percy refused. Subsequently, the deranged Percy went to Natchez to represent the Smiths in an unfavorable light. He received authorization from the commandant to summon the men to his house and order the sons to report to the seat of Spanish government. Believing that their problems were resolved, the father and his two sons present themselves to Charles Percy as directed. The still agitated Percy tells Zachariah Sr., "Old man, I am determined to destroy you, your seed, being, and generations. I have power to send you where you shall not be seen or heard of by anyone in this district again." Very strong words indeed, spoken in the presence of witnesses. On January 31st, 1794, surely driven by emotions he could neither understand nor control, Charles Percy ended his life. Tying a huge pot to his neck, he walked into the river and drowned. Were it not for the clear evidence of suicide, namely the pot used to complete the deed, no doubt James Smith and possibly his brother and father would have been prime suspects. 2 weeks later, Zachariah Smith appears before the Spanish court with his petition. Percy's deception had actually worked for a brief time. The well-respected Spanish governor Gayosa sternly cited Zachariah for encouraging his children in evil practices. Gayosa knew nothing about the other letter. Such a reprimand would stigmatize Zachariah as unworthy of credit trust and damage his reputation beyond repair. Gayosa ordered James and Zachariah Smith Jr. to leave the Natchez country. Zachariah Sr. petitioned against Gayosa's decision, which would disperse his family and possibly leave him destitute. In court, Zachariah argues respectfully that his sons are afraid of the power of Mr. Percy, who were afraid, and that Mr. Percy was destroying them just as he had threatened. After the harsh words were spoken, Percy believed that James Smith had violated his sense of honor, warped though it may have been. This is the same man who deceived the Smiths about the content of the document they were signing, and surely that's an act without honor. Francis Cassatt is sent by the Spanish government to conduct an investigation into the character of Zachariah Smith's family, and particularly his sons James and Zachariah Jr. Testimony from men acquainted with the Smiths was presented to court. Neighbors affirmed Zachariah's humble and quiet respectability. Equally as important, they concluded that the sons were guilty only of rude retorts to the late Charles Percy, issued under provocation and no other crimes. The court language reads, "These are the only crimes which drove these unfortunate brothers from the country and the government they liked and admired, and from their aged and affectionate parents and beloved brothers and sisters and numerous connections." As a result of this testimony, Gayosa rescinds his order and Zachariah's reputation is restored. Gayosa's decision ended the Smiths' dispute with Charles Percy, or did it? Recall Mr. Percy's threat to Zachariah and his descendants. James is adamant that Charles Percy's ghost continues to haunt him, and subsequent events give credence to this notion. By early 1801, James is back in court. This time it is the Court of Quarter Sessions of Peace. The Spanish, including the esteemed Gayosa, have departed. The territory of Mississippi is under the jurisdiction of the federal government. The newest dispute involving Percy's family is with the Venerable John Ellis, a local judge in Wilkinson County, who had married one of Charles Percy's daughters. Ellis rules unfavorably on James's ferry business, and then the same judge decides that he's going to build a public road through James's property, even though if he built it through his own property, it would have been a shorter distance and a better road. And thirdly, the judge decides that in some lingering boundary disputes between the Percys and the Smiths, he's going to take the side of his mother-in-law, Susan Percy, against the Smiths. Now, I believe there is something called recusing yourself, but obviously he never heard of it, so he does not get out of this mess at all. So the judge realizes there's a big problem now because he and James are having all these disputes. And the judge goes to James's house and he attempts to find a solution. Shouting and fist-waving erupts, and the situation degenerates, and James sends an intemperate and ill-advised letter to the judge. Honor becomes an issue again. James writes that he sought the goodwill of his fellow citizens and neighbors. We've heard that phrase before. But that Judge Ellis was allied with Widow Percy and her relatives in furthering the grudge by the late Charles Percy. The letter is presented verbatim in the court records. Filled with spelling errors and rambling sentences, James's letter is nevertheless fascinating to read. Once more, we are afforded a singular view of a man's thoughts and passions in language of 2 centuries ago. Despite his obvious distress, which he describes with great emotion, Smith is found in contempt of court for writing the letter and speaking contemptuous words of and concerning the court and its presiding justice. He is brought to court to answer the charges and ordered to pay 10 pounds sterling and be imprisoned for a month. James appeals the sentence, but the ruling stands. Thomas Foster, his successful and influential brother-in-law, agrees to pay part of the bond, which ensures that James will not miss his forthcoming court days. Zachariah Smith, his enviable reputation intact, serves as a juror in the Mississippi Territorial Courts in 1799 and 1801. Though considered an old man, this respected pioneer continues his participation in civic affairs.